Welcome. Nice to see everyone on our annual visit to Shushan, our virtual tour. There's always new stuff every year. Stuff gets better, new stories. So I hope you'll enjoy the ride. Our tour today, our virtual tour, is about the Persian Empire and a better understanding of the story of Purim, but really the background, the story in which it happens. Who are the main characters? What are the main sites, the palaces and the treasures? And hopefully you'll take this, and tomorrow night when you hear the Megillah, you'll appreciate things on a higher level. So I got a lot of fun stuff for you here. The first thing I would like to do is to show you the Persian Empire itself on the map. When you put it on the map, it's very different than when you just hear Hu Achashverosh Hamolech Mehodu V'ad Kush. Achashverosh is ruling all the way from Hodu to Kush, and it's sort of like out there, you don't really pay attention to it. And when you put it on the map, it suddenly means something different. It's the largest empire in the history of the ancient Near East. It's the richest empire. It is vast. It's a tremendous amount of land. From India, and this is the actual border of the Persian Empire at its height, the Indus Valley, from Hodu all the way to Kush, which is south of Egypt. In other words, Egypt is part of the empire, and it goes beyond Egypt. And it also goes to the closing pasuk in the Megillah is Iye Hayam. It's the islands. That's a reference to the border of Turkey and Greece on today's map. And that's also an important part of the story. So this is a vast, vast, vast landmass. And just putting that on the map, just seeing it, should be able to raise a bunch of questions about how did the Persians control this massive empire? What are the challenges that they had in controlling it? What innovations did they have to come up with to overcome these different challenges? And we'll see a bunch of these as we continue this tour. And the idea is that we'll actually see how this sheds light on the Megillah, because the Megillah is full of references to things which were commonplace in the Persian Empire, but would have been kind of out of place in other empires. And we'll see this as we go. But I want to start with some current events. This is something which was in the news, and it vanished as fast as it showed up. I actually am going to quote Chagai Misgav, the professor who analyzed this inscription that's dated supposedly to the father of Achashverosh, of Daryavesh, Darius. He called it the rise and fall of the Ostracon of Darius IV. There was basically a piece of pottery that was found, and a whole fanfare about it. Everybody thought this was something incredible. And then the real story turned out to be a little more interesting than just a fake that was out in the market. It's more subtle than that. I'm going to tell you that story. So let's start with some current events that have to do with ancient Israel. So I'm going to take us to a place called Lachish. So wait, there we are. So ancient Lachish. Now, Lachish is a site that usually comes up in the conversation of, let's say, Sancheriv, right? Sancheriv, the king of Assyria, who campaigned against Chizkiyahu 2,700 years ago. He destroyed the city of Lachish. If you visit the British Museum, there's the Lachish reliefs by Sancheriv. Sancheriv describes how he destroys the city. Or Nebuchadnezzar destroys the city. But what does it have to do with the Persian period? I'm giving you some context for this thing that was in the news, even though it turned out being not authentic, but it's a great story, and it really put Purim on the map. So let's go to Lachish and see it. So we're at the top of the site. We see that the site has a commanding view of the area. It's a hill it's on top of, but there's only two pieces of stone here that remained from when the British dug here very long time ago, when they dug and they found a palace which was dated to the Persian period. And we know the architecture of the Persian period, but all that remains here is these two stones. One of them is this, and it's the base of a pillar. And the other one is the one that the person who was nice enough to take this 360 view stood on top of to take the picture. And that's just software that erased him. These are the only remains from what was a Persian period administrative palace in the city of Lachish. They dug down in order to look for the first temple period stuff, which is more interesting to them. So this is gone. It's only there in the art in the journal in the reports, but that is going to give us some context to this find, which was in the news, and as I said, vanished as fast as it showed up. So I hope you saw this. Even Aisha Torah came out with a video about it, and I wrote to them, guys, you got to take this stuff down. Okay, but here's the story. In the background here is Lachish, and there is a large gathering with archaeologists from all over who came to discuss this find that was made a few days ago. It's this piece of clay. See the person holding it in their hand, and on it, in letters which fooled our best and brightest scholars of ancient writing, it says year 4 Darius, Daryavesh, Shnat Arba, Daryavush. This is, sorry, not 4, year 24. Now, there are 3 Dariuses in Persian chronology, but the Daryavesh, the Darius that concerns us, is Darius the Great, who is the father of Achashverosh. And the way we know that this is him is because the other 2 never made it to their 20th year. So this is year 24. This is Darius the Great, the father of Achashverosh. This made headlines everywhere. And a few people said, you know, it's too good to be true. And the truth is, if it's too good to be true, it ain't, right? In this case, it was not true, but it wasn't a fraud. This was a student, a graduate student, I think, who was on the site in Lachish while they were digging there. And for some, I guess, practice or instructional purpose, she etched something, and she did such a good job that Professor Chagai Mizgav of the Hebrew University basically put his reputation on the line, saying, this is it, right? This is real. And they gathered together, and it was a whole event. The next day or two, it turned out like this student is watching this. She's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? This was just something, I just etched something and I threw it away, and somebody found it on top. They're like, yeah, of course on top, because that's where the Persian period was, right? And they just kept on digging down. And the way the British used to dig, they would dig down and just throw everything all over the place, which was very damaging. But that's the ancient way they did archaeology. So like, it makes sense. Had they done a little more in-depth research of the material and so on, they would have figured it out earlier, but they figured it out. And Chagai Mizgav himself posted, he's like, I made a mistake, and we need to be able to admit our mistakes. Otherwise our field is doomed. So it's important to know when we make a mistake. Now he made a big move doing that after being the one to celebrate that this has been found. So this was like gone, like it was in the news like 3 days ago, and 2 days later it's over. It wasn't the original, but it wasn't a fake or a fraud. It was something made for education. So that's kind of our story. I think it's a bit of a fun introduction to talk about Purim, because this put Daryavesh and Achashverosh on the map, and everyone in Israel is talking about this. Like, everyone knows Achashverosh, but who knows about Darius and the first and the second and the third? Year 24, this has to be the first. Now, let's start talking about the Persian Empire. So back to our map of the empire. The Persian Empire is ginormous. It is really, really large. And what we're going to see is that it's so large that it even had 2 administrative centers, possibly because it was just so big. Like there's discussions as to why. We don't have direct reference that they made to why, but we do know for a fact that they have 2 administrative centers. One is Shushan, and the other sort of on and the second third of to the right here, it's Persepolis, right under where the map says Persia. So that we'll hopefully at least get a glimpse of that place. So here's the Persian Empire. But if we want to talk about the Persian Empire, we have to talk about its founder, Cyrus the Great, because he really kicks off what we call the Persian period, Shivat Zion, coming back to build the second Beit HaMikdash and all of that. So we really need to put our hand on that and to understand him and what he did a little bit better, because that will help us understand the rest of the story. So let's go to visit Cyrus. Cyrus the Great. We're starting from the end. Cyrus the Great dies at the age of 70 something. Cyrus dies after taking over the Babylonian Empire and basically succeeding it and being the next and the largest empire in the ancient Near East. And here he is buried in the Persian city of Pasargada. There's some remains that were found there. We have some writings, some inscriptions, like we know this is it, right? But I'm going to skip that stuff and go straight to his tomb. And we are at the tomb, or what remains of it, that is identified as the tomb of Cyrus the Great, Koresh Melech Paras. Now, Cyrus, having been buried here, was the legend goes that he was visited by Alexander the Great, who came to pay his respects to the king who founded the empire that he conquered. Who knows if the story actually happened? According to Don Carlin, it did. And thanks, Moshe Franklin, for referring me to him. The podcast, Hardcore History, King of Kings. But this is the tomb. Of course, they've been raided, over the years, but this at least the structure remains. So it's a national site. It's a UNESCO site, that is, and we're here in the typical Iranian terrain, which there's Zagros Mountains in the back, lots of hills. We'll visit some important hill very soon. So Cyrus is buried here. But the truth is that Cyrus actually ruled from Babylon, not from Pasargada, not from Shushan. And that takes us to the story of well, how exactly did he take over the empire? So Cyrus, of course, is famous because of the proclamation. And here's our teaser. We're going to get there later. This is the actual Cyrus cylinder, which is very, very similar in style and in content to the words of Cyrus of Koresh in the book of Ezra. In Ezra at the very beginning or at the very end of Divrei Yamim. Divrei Yamim in the end is the same proclamation, that in his year of ascension, Koresh, Cyrus, the king of Persia, he's letting the Jews who are exiled into Babylonia go back to Yerushalayim and to build the temple in Judea, and he's going to support them. The contents of the Cyrus cylinder are very similar, except that he's speaking to other nations who were deported into Babylon and allowing them to worship their traditional gods of their nations and not the Babylonian ones. So he's kind of like a very cosmopolitan, tolerant, religiously tolerant, kind of multicultural king. That's how he comes across. But let's start with Babylon. So the cylinder was actually found in Babylon. And these things sort of, you think, sometimes you wonder why things are found where they're found. I mean, if you've heard of the Hammurabi stela, which is of a king of Babylon, that was found in Shushan because the Persians took over Babylon, with Cyrus the Great, and then just took it. So, but this was actually meant to be here because it was under the Persians. These are the ruins of Babylon. Now, the ruins of Babylon in modern day Iraq are right next to the palace of Saddam Hussein, which is also, it's a fun story. He has paintings in his house of all these ancient archaeological sites, and he sort of saw himself as a neo Nebuchadnezzar. He printed money with a picture of Nebuchadnezzar and the Ishtar Gate. Like it was a big deal that he built his palace right next to where Babylon used to be. These are the gates right here, and I'll show them in a picture. Just a sec. No, not a picture. So what are we doing here? Cyrus the Great is a Persian. He comes from Persia, and he was the successor of the Babylonian Empire. He was gaining a lot of power And Babylon was basically the last country in the ancient Near East that didn't fall under the control of Persia. And once they fell, Persia completed its domination of the entire area all the way down to Egypt. So the way they were able to take over Babylonia, we don't have any direct story. There's several different sources. There's the Nabonidus tablets and so on. But there's two Greek historians who tell the story. One of them is Herodotus, and he might be telling the truth. He might be not. He might be making this stuff up. We don't really know. But two different, I think Xenophon as well tells the story, if I'm not mistaken. So we have two Greek historians that tell the story, but the story is a great one. So I'm going to tell it anyway and leave it to history to find out if it happened or not. But the city of Babylon was holding off and the Persians weren't able to conquer it. So what Cyrus the Great does, he comes invading from the north. This is called the Battle of Opis. It's known as Battle of Opis, 539 BCE. It's one of those dates that historians remember. And that's because of what happened here. In the Battle of Opis, which is some 50 kilometers north of ancient Babylon. So let's just pick a spot. Cyrus came with his workers, with his army, and they dug a canal that would then redirect the water of the Euphrates River, Nahar Prat. This is the Euphrates River today after the dam was built, so it doesn't look as powerful. But, like many of the rivers in the 1960s, once you build a dam, it doesn't look as impressive as it used to be. That's also the Jordan River, the Nile River. So that's true as well as the Euphrates and the Tigris. So the river was redirected. And what happened was that the western border, the natural border of Babylon, was dried out. And then the soldiers of Cyrus the Great were able to just march into Babylon unobstructed. And they just took over the city as everyone was reveling and partying and had no idea what hit them. And this consolidated the fall of the Babylonian Empire. That is Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus rules his empire from here, from Babylon. So that's Cyrus. How do we get from Cyrus to Ahasuerus and his father Darius? That we're going to need to unpack the story a little bit more. But first, let's visit the Cyrus cylinder and the treasures that were found in the Persian Empire in the British Museum, of course. Hold on to your virtual seatbelts. Here we go. All right, wonderful, and welcome to the British Museum. Those of you who've been with me in previous tours, you know that I'm obsessed with this museum because there are so many different things you can do here. Let's do the Persian period. All right, so this is the entrance to the Persian period. There you go. Look, just give you a little sneak peek. Oh, look at that, Cyrus cylinder, little thing in a box, right? We'll get there in very soon. But first, let's look at the picture of the king. This is a cast copy. The original is still standing in the palaces of Persepolis. We see a kind of a throne with the legs of the throne look like an animal. If you look closely, you'll see what animal. It's an animal which is a big favorite of the Persians. It's a lion. We'll see a lot of that. And the chair itself, look how it has three tiers of people who have their hands up and they're supporting the throne. Now, at a closer look, we'll look at the king in a moment, but at a closer look, everyone is dressed differently, has a different hairdo. And if the paint was still here, I can imagine they would look differently in their skin color as well, and the color of the textile, their fabrics. We'll see some samples of that soon. So these are all of the nations that comprise the throne, basically. So this idea of a very multicultural empire is expressed in our very first encounter with the empire. And here's the king sitting on a miniature version of this conceptual throne that he's sitting on, this idea. So here's the picture of the throne. And there's the king. This is either Achashverosh or Artaxasta, his son, sitting on the throne with his servant behind him, sort of fanning him, behind his head. And look at his hand. Look what he's holding in his hand. It is really cool to sort of be able to picture the things that we read about in the Megillah. Because look, there is the scepter. There's the Sharvit HaZahav. Right? You can imagine just the distance that Esther would be standing if he lifts the scepter and she touches it. That's a great story. We can kind of flesh out how this scene looked. And now we're going to go inside the museum, the gallery. So the Cyrus cylinder, of course, this is it, what's known as the Edict of Human Rights, as some like to call it. And it was basically the introduction of Cyrus, the importance of Cyrus being, of course, a very sort of benevolent king who is tolerant of other people's religions, other people's practices. We're going to see this throughout. We're going to see how this fits into different parts of the Megillah, because the Megillah is full of references to this policy that the Persians had, which was able to contain other people who are different without forcing them to change, like you had to do with Babylon and Assyria and so on. So here's the Cyrus cylinder. That's our intro. And I'd like to point out a few different things here. First of all, guards. Okay, royal guards. There's the more boring ones here because they don't have any color on them. But then there's these ones from Shushan, which were excavated by the French. So a lot of them are in the Louvre. And it's based on this that I think it was the movie 300 that they made Persian soldiers, they made their fabric. Persian textile, I want to share with you a few samples because we've actually found in excavations not only original Persian textile, but textiles that relate to the story that describe the opulence of the empire, the luxurious empire, and what their resources had. So I'm going to show you a few samples of things that were found, even though they're not exactly there on display. So here's our soldiers. These are the Royal Guard, also known as the Immortals, because there were always exactly 10,000 of them. If you died, another few would take their place. Their number was static. So they're called the Immortals. These are the Royal Guard of the king. And if you will, you can imagine Bigtan and Teresh sitting there at the guard. What do they look like? Probably something like this. Now, to the right is the textile from the period. We're talking about from the Persian period. Looks like the fabric that they're wearing. And it has the royal red in it, the argaman, right? Which is in the description of the opening of the Megillah, where you have the banquet, right? The royal banquet. And you also have it at the end with Mordechai wearing the different clothes, tchelet, etc. So this is original fabric from the period. And this one from the period of the reign of Achashverosh from Xerxes. We'll talk later about the etymology, how we know Xerxes is Achashverosh. But look at that, horse riders. And you think about how many times horses are mentioned in the Megillah. I mean, it's quite obvious that horses are a big deal in the Persian Empire. Haratzim, Yerochvei Harechesh HaChashteranim, Bnei HaRamachim, Haratzim, Yetz'u Dechufim Bidvar HaMelech. Like it's constantly stressed in a bit of an over-the-top way, but horses were a major part of the Persian Empire, and children learned how to ride horses in the upper class of the Persian Empire. So it was a big deal, and this is an original fabric from the time of Achashverosh. So that's an amazing thing. You're getting a glimpse. And finally, this one has purple. Now, purple, this is the dye made from the chilazon, the snail, the murex, which takes roughly half a ton of snails to produce about 1 gram of powder of pigment. I might be off by the numbers, but it's up there in the hundreds of kilograms. We're talking about the most expensive pigment in the ancient world. And we found it in fabric made by the Persians. We even found it painting jars, like really showing off your wealth. If we want to talk about the Haroto et Osher Kevod Malchuto v'Tikar Tiferet Gedulato, you're talking about the Osher Kevod Malchuto, like the whole wealth that he's showing off in his palace. This is part of it. This is part of it. But there's also an image of a queen and a princess, or a queen and a maiden wearing a crown on her head. You see that on the blue on the left and also on the right. And these are from the period of Daryavesh Darius I, who we just saw that piece of pottery that, until recently people thought it was a real deal. So that's the period of time. Anyway, let's go back to the museum. So those are Persian guards, and we see how they're dressed. And those weapons are later. Those are from a later period of Persia. I want to show you parts of the palace, even though we're going to go to the palace. We spoke about how the Persians like to show how the kingdom was comprised of many different nations, but it's not just showing them, it's showing what they're doing to support the empire. So there's a procession here of people who are being led by a Persian with that kind of square top hat. We'll see more of them. But these people are all wearing a very distinct hat, which represents what nation they're coming from. And they are bearing gifts. They are bearing gifts as they come to the capital in order to pay their annual taxes at the annual Rosh Hashanah, if you will. They're at their New Year festival, and that's when the taxes were collected. And the Persians did this very effectively, which made them so rich. So not only would you come and pay your taxes, you're trying to find a gift that will outdo the gift that the Medes, that's nothing. You should see what the Scythians brought to the Persians, and not to mention the Sogdians, which is really India, not to mention what we brought. Like, everyone's trying to outdo the other person, and this is displayed and this is put on the Hall of Fame. I mean, think of the ego that gets involved with being shown on the king's palace and then getting favor. So there's a lot of things going on here, but the Persians were very good at leveraging the multicultural nature of the empire and displaying that and using that to their advantage. So these representatives of a different nation are bringing fancy fabrics, textile, leather, whatever it is. It's not clear what they're holding. And there's more and more and more of them. Here, these ones are dressed differently. These might be Egyptians, who knows? These guys are Arabs with oh, that's a dromedary. That's a double-humped camel. So they show the whole empire, right? Let's see the other side. Okay, more of the same concept, but this actually has an inscription in cuneiform. But here's the different nations. Each one is bearing tribute, and there's the lion attacking a bull. That's a very a favorite of the Persians, to show that kind of battle of powerful animals. And the lion is the king, right there. But speaking of lions, there's another one right here staring at us. And this lion is actually a royal weight. So instead of just having a big, kikar, talon, as it's called, we have just a funky shape. They made it look nice instead of just like a block. So it's kind of cool. And there's, of course, all these gold and silver bowls. Now, the gold and silver bowls, that's our next stop. Let's get a better view here. The gold and silver bowls were used in the banquet. Okay, just want to remind you also, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, and I will stop at the end and take questions as well. So there's lots of jewelry here, plenty of gold. There are rings of all different types, rings that are used to sign documents, like Achashverosh takes his ring and gives it to Haman, and Haman uses it to sign. That's using the royal signature. So these are rings. All kinds of things, jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, pendants, they look like toys, all kinds of stuff, little bowls, and even there's a little tiny golden toy carriage. It's kind of cool. And these bowls. I'd like to give you a closer look of these bowls, but first of all, let's use a metaphor from current events, at least in Israel. You may be familiar, but in Israel, there was recently they canceled the new tax on disposables. So plasticware, it's a lot cheaper when you have a lot of kids. It's easier to buy a lot of plastic than to wash, dishes for 10 kids 3 times a day. So let's just say that there are some communities more than other that were really hurt by this tax, which was recently abolished. So there's no longer the tax in Israel on disposables. It was there for a short while from the previous government. But when people would bring out their plastic, their disposables, they would say, I'm bringing out the expensive stuff. That was the joke locally. But that's Israeli stuff. But to our point, the Persians were so wealthy that they never used the same dishes twice. If we're to take Herodotus at his word, right? The Herodotus says that they had so much gold and silver at their banquets that it just wasn't worth the trouble to wash the dishes. We're talking gold and silver, right? Just let the guests keep it. Let the guests take it home. It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson did this calculation of for a regular person, if you're walking down the street, what's the smallest amount of money that you would say it's not worth my time to bend down and try to pick up? So let's say, I don't know, 1 cent. If you're in a real rush, would you really bend down for a dime? Right? Maybe yes, maybe no. He did that math on Bill Gates. He said, based on the wealth of Bill Gates, how much money would be the same thing as, let's say, like 5 cents for us that we wouldn't bother bending down and picking up if we're in a hurry? It's about $4,700, something like that. It's like it's not the money I'm making by by continuing to walk is more than pausing to bend down and pick it up. It's not worth my time. Just to get an idea. So when you talk about the Persian Empire, this being disposable stuff, now let's see a few examples. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures where it's organized and you can see a little bit sharper. So this is the same things are just assembled together, gold, silver, and there's even, look carefully, there's another bowl, which is made of glass. Now, glass in the Persian period was very rare, very hard to make in such sizes. Glass was made like small jewelry, right? Later on, we start having the Greeks and the Romans making glass much more popular. So glass was as valuable as gold, just to give some context. Let's see some more examples. So on the tomb of an official, an official who was, I guess, in the Greek part of the Persian Empire, we see a scene of a banquet. Okay, we look at the Megillah. It says mitot zahav v'chesef al ritzpat bahat vashesh v'dar v'sochar. It's like we're sitting on beds of gold and silver. This is how you drink in a royal banquet. There's a servant who's pouring. Now, I want to point out to you, especially those of you who like wine, there are several different ways to handle the wine. You don't just drink it out of the cup, out of the bottle, obviously. So the servant is using a vase here, pouring the wine into what's called a raiton, kind of a horn, and then that gets poured into this flat bowl called a fiali. Okay, so these are 3 different parts. So the servant goes around pouring into your raiton. The raiton stays next to you, and you pour to yourself more and more and more until you're empty. And as the Megillah says, "Vashtiya chadat ein ones, kichen tziva melech al korav beito la'asot kirtzon ish va'ish." Everyone can drink as much as they want, no pressure, as much as they want, whatever wine you want, right? It's there. We're taking care of you. So this is scene 1. Now let's look at the different parts. These are raitons. The 2 on the left are in the Met, and the one on the right is, I think it's in the Louvre, but it might be in Persia. But the 2 gold and silver, that's really nice. But the blue one is made of stone. And it's not just any stone. It's one of the most expensive stones in the ancient world, lapis lazuli, which is just Latin for blue stone. But it sounds nicer in Latin. So lapis lazuli was very expensive. It was a symbol of status. And one of the larger pieces of blue stone in ancient Egypt are like this small. Yeah, it's like the Choshen, perhaps this is the sapphire, maybe the sapphire of the Choshen, perhaps, right? They're small. This is huge. Right? This is a really incredible chunk of blue. So that's these are rhytons. You pour the wine into here, and the wine comes pouring out into a fiali. Now, this fiali, I'm showing it to you from the top because there's an inscription in Akkadian cuneiform, and this is the translation. This is in the Met, and you won't be able to see it probably until 2026 when they reopen their ancient Near Eastern galleries. They're doing a major overhaul. So here's a good picture of it. And here's what it says. Artaxerxes, which is the king who comes after Ahasuerus. Artaxerxes, the great king, king of kings, king of lands, son of Xerxes, the king. Xerxes, son of Darius, the king, the Achaemenid. In his house, this silver bowl was made. So when you think about Nehemiah is the Sar HaMashkim. He is the cupbearer of the king of Artaxerxes in Shushan. That's the context. That's where this is from. It's from that king, that reign. Who knows if Nehemiah actually poured into this? We don't know, but it's the palace, right? That's amazing. Okay, let's see a few more of them, and then we'll go back to the museums. So here's a few, just an assembly, another rhyton, another fiali, a few golden cups from the Persian Empire, and check out the different animals. I mean, they were really into it. You have, I think it's a hyrax or a goat, a lion, a bull. They're really, really into that stuff. Okay, so we've seen a lot of stuff, but I'd like to go back to our story to talk about Cyrus and how we moved from Cyrus to Daryavesh and to Ahasuerus. And for that, we are going to see now the most important inscription from the ancient Near East. The most important inscription from the ancient Near East is from the Persian Empire. And once I show it to you, I'll tell you why it's the most important. Hold on, we're going on a carpet ride to, well, not Arabia, but had to use Aladdin. Back to Persia. The Zagros Hills. The Zagros Hills, the Zagros Mountains, that is, these are the mountains of Persia. Persia is full of hills and mountains, and that is fertile ground for carving monuments way up on the hill, to the mountain, to show your greatness if you're a king of Persia. So let's see what they carved on this hill. Keep on saying hill. It's mountain. It's a nice hike. So here we are at the ground, the street view. This is the site of Mount Behistun. And I want you to remember Behistun. It's the most important inscription in the ancient Near East is the Behistun inscription. So here we are, visitor center. You can get Coke, I guess. They have it everywhere. And let's move further up the hill. And here we are. So all the way up, we've just come from down there, from the visitor center, and looking up, there's a hike. And up this hike, they're currently doing renovations there at the time that this film was taken, but there's a flat surface in the side of the mountain here, where it's not exactly Mount Rushmore, but it is the story of one of the founders of the Persian Empire, and who took it to its greatest heights, Daryavesh, Darius the Great. That's going to be our next part of the story. Let's see what the actual picture is. Here's a drawing of the picture, and then we'll see an actual photograph. So the drawing here is a very typical Persian picture. There's Ahura Mazda, the sort of winged disked god that's up there in some story. There's a king with soldiers behind him and lots of captives who are tied around the neck. And the king is stepping on somebody, right? Now, all of these lines of text around are the important thing. Sir Rawlinson published this, but he, I guess, paid some 12-year-old local Persian kid to do the dangerous work of climbing up here and then tracing it all with paper, making a squeeze, like tracing the paper pressing it into the rock, and then he was able to read it. So, some 12-year-old kid really should have gotten a lot more credit, but apparently that was the name of the kid. So no, I'm mixing up two stories. Scrap that. That's Abu Simbel, different story. Scrap that. Forget I said anything. But so this kid probably should have gotten a lot more credit, but at least we know the story. So what is this story? So remember Koresh, Cyrus the Great. Now, Cyrus the Great founded what's known as the Achaemenid or the Achaemenid Empire. That's important. I usually wouldn't have to get into that if it wasn't, but it is important. Cyrus is a Persian who comes from a dynasty of Persian kings founded by a king named Achaemenesh, and he's the descendant of Achaemenesh, so he's an Achaemenid. That's important because that's his claim to the throne. I am an Achaemenid, a Achaemenid, a Persian. He captures Babylon and builds this massive empire. He has a son who his name is Cambyses or Cambuzi. Cambyses is not mentioned in Tanakh. There are some Jewish commentators who are familiar with him, but he's not of interest to Tanakh, so he's not mentioned there. Cambyses dies. After Koresh's son Cambyses dies, there is nobody of that bloodline to continue. There is an imposter who's right here, nicely placed underneath the leg of Darius. We'll get to him. His name is Gaumata. And Gaumata, as the story here on the wall tells us, was pretending to be the descendant of Cyrus and Darius, who is really his first or second cousin, but he comes from Achaemenesh. He's the direct bloodline from a different sibling. He really has a claim to the throne. So he exposes Gaumata and he comes with an army, and after a significant battle is able to overpower the supporters of Gaumata in this picture. And of course, by the grace of Ahura Mazda, the Persian god, he's able to achieve all of this, yada, yada. And he marches in and reestablishes the dominance of the Achaemenid dynasty and bloodline. Now, that story is told here on this wall. But the reason that this is the most important inscription in the ancient Near East is because it's written in three, not one, in three languages. It is written in ancient Persian, in ancient Elamite, and in Akkadian, which was the diplomatic language of all of the great empires up to this point. So three languages. Now, where do we hear of an inscription that's three languages in another place? Right? It should come to you. Right? We know how to read hieroglyphics because of a trilingual inscription by, this is Ptolemy V in Egypt. So it's Greek and it's hieroglyphics, and it's also demotic, which is more like a handwritten Egyptian. So by comparing three languages, you can decipher the hieroglyphics. So to here, it's obviously a little bit more complicated because you need a frame of reference. You don't have the Greek here, but because it's in three languages, they were able, Rawlinson and others after him were able to decode cuneiform. And that is incredible because now when we excavate in Nineveh and in Kalach and in Bavel, and we find all these, we found in Nineveh 30,000 documents written by in the library of the king Ashurbanipal. I mean, now we know how to read them. We know what they say. We can learn about Nebuchadnezzar. We can learn about Sancherib. We could not access any of that if it wasn't for the Persian Empire. As it says in the Megillah, Medina o Medina kichtava, ve'am va'am kilshono. It seems to be obsessed with making every royal decree in every possible language. And it's not only these three languages. Let me show you a couple more examples. So look, here's one that's in the Met. And I'm showing it to you, and I'm showing you just the inscription part in large. We have three lines of text on the top that says Xerxes the Great King in Akkadian, Elamite, and Ancient Persian, and in hieroglyphics. This is from Egypt. This is how you write Achashverosh in hieroglyphics. Isn't that cool? Not only in hieroglyphics, but also here's another couple of samples. On the right is an inscription from Darius the Great, writing in Greek. And on the left is a letter from the time of Artaxerxes in Aramaic from Egypt. It's actually written by Jews. That's known as the Elephantine Papyri. This is actually in the Brooklyn Museum. You can see it today if you go to Brooklyn. They have all the rest are there in storage, so you'd have to request to see them, but this one's on display. So we've already seen 5 different languages, 6 different scripts and languages in the Persian Empire. This is great because this is part of our story of understanding the Persians as how you manage to control such a large empire by catering to other people, by letting them speak their language, instead of forcing them to bend to find a translator and a notary to pay your taxes in the diplomatic Akkadian, which is just a huge hassle and makes it a lot more difficult to pay your taxes. Let's make it easier for you to pay taxes. It's a win-win, right? Or we will speak in your language and you will be a lot more loyal to the empire because we care about you, right? So that's one more thing that we've seen. And on that note, it's time to actually meet Daryavesh, in the National Museum of Tehran, which is our stop right before Shushan. Now, it is King Daryavesh, who, once he kicks out the imposter Gaumata, he moves the capital to Shushan, which is a very ancient Persian city, a lot of history, a lot of roots, very patriotic, and not so much trouble as Babylon. Babylon is always trouble. It's an ancient city. There's a lot of religious and cultural sensitivities there. We're moving out of the conquered territories. We are going to our homeland to establish our capital. That's what Daryavesh and his son Achashverosh do, and they build the palace in Shushan. So we are in the National Museum of Tehran. We're going to walk around a little bit. Let's do a little 360 map of the empire. There's a huge leg of some lion from some statue or other. There's even there's another lion right in front of us. There's even dogs down the hall. There's a dog standing guard, and there's lots more here. There's a bull we can see sort of. I jumped ahead. My bad. There we go. And now let's talk about Daryavesh. So here's a statue of Daryavesh. Daryavesh the first, Daryavesh the Great, the father of Achashverosh. We're very close to discussing the names and the identification. But first, this stone, to the more familiar with Egyptian archaeology, it kind of looks like a pharaoh, Paro. The pharaoh this is a typical pharaoh statue, except they switched his clothing, or actually clothed him, because the pharaohs would usually look like they're just wearing a dress, and then they're pretty much naked, and they have hieroglyphics written all over them. This is a Persian king in looking like an Egyptian on a stone that, if we look at it closer, look at that. Ta-da! Hieroglyphics. Not only hieroglyphics, we'll get to these hieroglyphics in a moment, but look at his robes. On our right is hieroglyphics, and on our left is cuneiform. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's in 3 languages, but I don't know about this one in particular. His head broke, but we know for sure that this was made in Egypt. It was manufactured in Egypt because we know what kind of stone it is. But the imagery below is typical Egyptian, but it's written about Darius, calling him the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the king of both lands. And fun fact, Egypt traditionally was viewed as 2 different countries, which are tied together, as this picture shows you, by the different deities that represent Upper and Lower Egypt. And even in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, the way we say Egypt is plural. It's Mitzrayim, Einaim, Yadaim, Oznaim, Raglaim, Mitzrayim. It's plural. It's 2 countries, which is cool. Now, we'll get to the statue in a moment, okay? But the statue was found, oh, look, here's another guard. The statue was found right here. You see there's an arrow. This is Sha'ar HaMelech. This is the king's gate. And I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh my gosh, We started 5 minutes late, so give me like 10 minutes. As I don't want to miss out. There's so much to do. The statue was found right here at the King's Gate, and there's a picture of the archaeologist uncovering it here. So it was brought from Egypt to Shushan, and it was destroyed. Happens. Here's the palace. This is a reconstruction of the palace in Shushan, and that's our next stop is Shushan. But I want to show you the bottom of the statue. So let's just get a better view. Okay. See these pictures here with names of different countries. It's from the statue. We'll see it right here, and then we'll be back to there. So you look underneath the statue. In typical Egyptian fashion, the pharaoh would be standing on top of all of his subjects. So this is the king of Persia in pharaonic style, standing on top of all of his subjects. And each nation looks different, and they're on their knees and hands up. They're praising, right? All of the showing like they praise the king. And inside a sort of like a closed circle, which represents a walled city, which is the symbol in Egyptian hieroglyphs for this is the name of the kingdom. So these are all kingdoms. It goes all around on the other side as well. And I'll give you just what it looks like if you put every one of these people on the map. And that's the picture on the bottom of the statue. So look at that. Mehodu ve'ad Kush. This is incredible, right? It's a massive empire, and you get it. It's all underneath the feet of Daryavesh, who's now it's now his line all the way to the end, all the way to Alexander the Great. That's Darius III, who was conquered by Alexander the Great. This is it. Like he's the rest of the kingdom. They rule from Shushan. And they move to Shushan, which is going to be our next stop. But before we do that, just back to the museum. Here's a picture from the treasury. We just came from there. A picture of the treasury in Persepolis, which is the other city. And it shows you a seated Ahasuerus or Darius. There's two different possibilities. If you look at it here, what they say here is Ahasuerus, Xerxes. So this would be Xerxes sitting on his throne, and behind him is the heir to the throne, Artaxerxes, Artaxashta, the heir to the throne behind him. And we've seen these guys before on relief, different kinds of ministers, representatives of different countries, and guards. This is from the treasury, right? That's all really cool. Now, we have two more stops. We have Shushan, and then we have a little surprise at the end. So before we do Shushan, I'd like to talk about the name Ahasuerus for a moment through an inscription which was found in the foundation of the palace. That's this tablet. These tablets, some of them were even made of gold. They found these tablets basically like a time capsule, which are buried underneath in the foundations of the palace. And when it was excavated, these were found, and they tell the story of the building of the palaces by Daryavesh and Ahasuerus. Now, here's the cool part. How do we know that that Ahasuerus is the son of Daryavesh? Because it actually is a machloket. There is a discussion. There's like a bit of a discrepancy between Ezra and some of the other books that talk about him, and Dat Mikra gets into this, but basically we know that this is correct, and Dat Mikra points out, how you deal with the different versions of where are we with Daryavesh, because there are apparently three of them, and that's in Tanakh. When you just hear Daryavesh, you assume there's just one, so it's confusing, but there were three of them. But long story short, this is a drawing of one of these inscriptions by Rawlinson, who's the guy who got the kid to climb up the hill and trace the pictures. And look at the two underlined areas. I'm going to highlight them. Here's the first one and the second one. Okay, so the first one is the name Chishayarsha. Chishayarsha. If you just add an "a" before, which would make it easier for a Semitic person, a Hebrew speaker, to pronounce it, it's Achshayarsha, Achshverosh. There it is, Achashverosh. Right? It's pretty straightforward. And he's the son of Daryavesh. So this is Daryavesh. But how did we get from here to Xerxes? That has to do with the Greeks. The Greeks, as you may know, do not have the letter shin. They can't pronounce sha. Daryavesh, Achashverosh, Artaxasta, Moshe. That's why the Greeks write Moses instead of Moshe. So that's a Greek thing. The way, if you look carefully at the last pasuk in the Megillah, it says Vayasam HaMelech Achashverosh. It just says Achashrash, Acharchash. That's the proper pronunciation of Achashverosh. It's Charchash or Chshayarsh. Chshayarsh is the way it's written, but in the way you write it in Greek is Chserchses instead of Chshayarsh. So we read in English what's pronounced in Greek Chserchses and not Chashrash, Chshayarsh. That's all it is. So Darius is Daryavush. And Artaxax is Artaxashta. So that's all it is. It's a Greek pronunciation of a Persian word, and in Hebrew we just add an aleph to make it easy to pronounce. So long story short, Chshayarsh is Achashverosh, that is Xerxes. I hope that's satisfactory. I can refer you to more materials about that later, but our palace in Shushan is overdue. Let's jump. Hang on. And Shushan. Here we go. Shushan Habira, the palace built by Daryavesh and by Achashverosh. We know that because of their writing. So here is the city of Shushan. What was found here, we've seen in the museums already, but it's important to see the actual site, which is surrounded by the modern city called Shush. That's Shushan. And there's two parts of Shushan in the Megillah, which we need to point out. Okay. The first part is the palace. So here it is. This is the actual palace, which was on the top of a hill. This is the hill. This whole thing is the hill, and there's a fortress. And below us, here we are, is Ha'ir Shushan. Shushan Habira, Ha'ir Shushan. Now, when we say Shushan Habira, we usually think the capital city. So like, how is Ha'ir Shushan different from Shushan Habira? But the word Bira in Tanakh does not mean capital city. It means fortress. It is a fortress. So a Bira is a fortress. They end up becoming interchangeable because usually the capital city would have a fortress, but the Bira just means that. And I'll show you a few samples. This is just a map that makes it easy to understand. But I'll show you some samples of the pictures in a moment. So here we are, Shushan the fortress and Shushan the city. So we have the artisans, everyone else living, and then the courtesans up there, and there's the palace built by Daryavesh and the fortress, etc., etc. Now let's take a little bit of a street view of what's there to see in Shushan today. There's an image of some pillars there, like bulls on the top, and this man is standing next to the Capitol. It's broken, but it's the shape of bulls that would hold up the beams of a ceiling 25 meters high. That's up there. It's like it's almost 100 feet. These are very massive pillars, but there's not that much left to see here in Shushan today. It's pretty much ruined, excavated, destroyed. So that's it. We saw the archaeology. We saw the stuff that was found. But let's look at some pictures that will help us put it together. And then I have a little short surprise. So bear with me. So we have a reconstruction of the palace based on the different archaeology from this, and also Persepolis, which is another city, which we need more time to visit that one tonight. I don't want to keep you too long, but it's also a massive, massive palace built by Achashverosh and Daryavesh and Achashverosh and then Artaxasta. But it's very similar. So this is the palace. We'll look into more details. Here's the floor plan. And you see the garden with an irrigation system, and this room with a lot of bases of columns is just like a cut through to see it. But these are columns that were almost 100 feet high, and they held up the ceiling for the banquet hall. This is where the party is happening, right? So now let's look at a few pictures that will help us like put it together. So here's the palace, right? Now, Yehuda Landi has a beautiful book. You can pick it up at Eichler's. It's by Feldheim Press. It's called Purim in the Persian Empire, where he goes through the archaeology and lines it up with the story and really brings it to life. So this is Yehuda Landy's numbers, which he put on the map, telling you what the function of, based on what the function of each one of these rooms has been identified by the archaeology. It's saying that that's what each one of these, here's where the different parts of the story happened in the Megillah. Okay, so number one is Sha'ar HaMelech, Mordechai, Yeshev Sha'ar HaMelech. 3, Chatzar Bet HaMelech HaChitzona, the outer courtyard, where Haman comes with his evil plan to make the gallows and hang up Mordechai. 2 is the banquet hall. That's where the big party is happening at the beginning of the Megillah. And 5, 6, and 7 are the Chatzar Bet HaMelech HaPnimit. Esther's standing at number 5. Achashverosh is sitting at 7 when she's risking her life and coming into the inner chambers, and he doesn't give the order to shoot her. He says, come, basically, and points the sharvit, the scepter, at her, right? Number 8 is the women's courtyard, is Beit HaNashim, and so on and so forth. So you're able to put it all together. And finally, here is an example. This is more of Persepolis, but it's very similar to Shushan, of the connection between the gardens with the irrigation and the plants and the water, the beautiful scenery, and the banquet hall. So Esther is there with the banquet, and she points her finger at Haman, and then Achashverosh storms out to Ginat Habitan. He's trying to like get some air and to think. So he runs out of the banquet hall to the garden. Like, you can see it happening right here. Right. So that's an amazing thing that you can put this all together. Now, I was going to say, let's at least look a little bit at Persepolis, but we're not going to talk about it. I just want you to see it for a few moments. And then we have a surprise for you. So here's Persepolis. And it's in much better condition. So you see how we can sort of have the audacity to say like, oh, it probably looked like that, right? It's very similar. Some of the pillars are still standing, and this was destroyed by Alexander the Great. Right? This is a massive palace. It's much bigger than Shushan, and that's where some of the stuff in the museum is from. Anyway, short visit to Persepolis. Here is our surprise. So the Persian Empire, we're going to leave with this discussion, and then we'll open up for questions. Transportation and communication in a very large empire. I have the psukim, the verses up here on the right, of an example of the Persian messenger system. The Jews are saved. Let's get on the double, send the horses out to all corners of the empire in every language, and tell everyone that the Jews have the right to defend themselves, right? That's the end of the Megillah. Now, how do you get to the farthest reaches of the empire fast enough to be effective? The road from Susa to Sardis, which is in yellow here, is one of several royal roads which were built by the Persian Empire, and they had to communicate between the different parts of the empire. So this is smack bang in the heart of the empire, Shushan, going all the way to Sardis, which is on the border of Greece, basically. It's the western border of the Persian Empire, Haaretz ve'yeh hayam. And we actually know from historic writings that Achashverosh, Xerxes, was busy fighting the Greeks in what's known as the Battle of Thermopylae. They made a movie about it called 300, which is a bit exaggerated, but it gives you the idea. It's an important battle. Achashverosh loses that battle, comes back, and then marries Esther. That's sort of where it fits in the chronology. He gets rid of Vashti. In year 3, he's gone for 4 years, and suddenly in year 7, he remembers that he has to get married. Right? He's busy. In the context of the description of that war, which is described by Herodotus, Herodotus describes the Persian messenger system, and for that, here is our surprise. I hope you're familiar with where we are. Give yourself a moment to get acquainted. Madison Square Garden. But that's not why we're here. We are here for the post office because we are talking about messenger systems. Let's get a closer look at the post office. So New York City post office, which kind of looks like the Acropolis, which is funny because the quote on top of it is from the Greek-Persian Wars. There's a quote on top. Let me move a little bit, give us a better view. Can that be done from here? It's okay, I have pictures. Here's the, here's the better view. And here's our quote. Now, this is a quote, I mean, I've done this enough that I know this quote by heart, but I'm sure you've all heard of this. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night will stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, right? This quote is taken from none other than Herodotus, who's describing the road from Susa to Sardis in the context of the battle of Ahasuerus against the Greeks and the messenger system. Now, the messenger system, the way it worked was basically like the Pony Express. You pass on the messenger from, you just hop onto new horses and you cut down the waiting time and the resting time. And here's the incredible part. From Susa to Sardis would have taken 3 months. That can't fly when you're running the Persian Empire. They cut it down to 9 days. 9 days instead of 3 months by using the Pony Express, the Persian messenger system. And the reason it's in New York City is because it's the motto of the U.S. Postal Service. That's why it's on the James Farley building. So that is an incredible thing to see that here in New York City, the inspiration for having a good messenger system comes from the Persians. And it's in the context of Ahasuerus fighting the Greeks, which is sort of like in between the lines of the Megillah. It's like there in the background. That's an amazing story. So that was our tour with a brief, definitely not enough, but enough for an hour, a brief overview of the Persian Empire, its founders, the palaces, the riches, and how they interact with the Megillah. And I hope that this is going to enrich your Purim experience, at least for the visual part of what's going on.